Subscribe, click the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable story. The clatter of silverware against plates filled the air, but it was the wrong kind of noise. The tense, brittle sound of a family holding itself together with thin smiles and polite nods. I had walked into the dining room expecting routine. Dad joking about work, my siblings half listening, stepmom fussing over the food. Nothing had prepared me for what came next. "Stay home, you useless," she said. Her words were sudden, sharp, and they cut through the room like ice. I froze. My fork hovered in midair, the steam from my plate curling up in slow swirls I didn't even notice. My ears rang. I blinked, certain I had misheard. Dad shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. My siblings looked away, pretending the words weren't said, hoping they didn't have to choose sides. But I heard every syllable. I felt every weight of it. I wanted to respond. I wanted to shout, to cry, to explain myself. But the words didn't come. My mouth felt empty, my chest tight. A strange calmness swept over me, like a sudden cold clarity. I stood up. The chair scraped the floor, loud in the silence. Every head turned. Stepmom's eyes narrowed. Dad's jaw tightened. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My legs carried me out of that room as if they had been waiting for this moment for years. Outside, the night air was a shock. Cool, clean, alive. I breathed it in, letting it fill the space her words had carved out in me. I walked without looking back, leaving the light of the house behind. It wasn't just the insult. It was the years behind it. The whispers when I thought no one was listening. The sighs when I failed to measure up. The quiet dismissals that made me doubt myself. Every memory came rushing in, stinging sharper than any slap or shout ever could. I remember last year when I tried to share my artwork, she told me it was a waste of time. Last summer, when I wanted to join a team, she scoffed and said I'd never fit in. Every moment, a quiet shove towards believing I was nothing. I had endured it silently, convincing myself it didn't matter. But tonight, it did. Tonight, her words weren't just a sentence, they were a verdict. And for the first time, I refused to accept it. The streetlights cast long, thin shadows across the pavement. I walked fast, the rhythm of my footsteps pounding against the echo of everything I had held inside. And then, almost without realizing it, I stopped. I realized something fundamental. Revenge didn't have to be loud. It didn't have to be cruel. It could be quiet, purposeful, lived out in a life rebuilt on dignity, respect, and self-worth. I could rise without malice simply by proving that my life was worth more than her words. The memory of the table lingered. The way Dad didn't intervene, the way my siblings averted their eyes, the cold precision in her tone. It could have broken me. And maybe it almost did. But it didn't. Not completely. Instead, it lit something else inside me. A determination, a promise, a quiet rebellion born not of hate, but of resolve. I thought of all the moments she had tried to define me. The failed grades, the awkward attempts at socializing, the clumsy mistakes. I would not let those moments define me anymore. I would reclaim them with proof, with action, with patience. The kind of revenge that left no scars on others, only the undeniable evidence of my growth. For a moment, I let the night swallow me entirely. The wind tugged at my jacket. The faint glow of distant lights blurred my vision, and I felt a strange peace. The hurt was still there, sharp and raw, but it had a purpose now. It was fuel. When I returned home hours later, it was quiet. The house smelled of the dinner I had left behind, of roast chicken and faint perfume. I walked past the dining room, past her smug, satisfied posture. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than anything I could have shouted. And as I climbed the stairs to my room, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. This was only the beginning. Every choice I made from this night forward would be mine. Every success, every step of progress would be my answer. Every moment of doubt she had planted would meet its quiet justice through my life. I sat on my bed staring at the ceiling, letting the silence stretch around me. The anger, the betrayal, the sadness, they were all there, but they had a direction now. I had a plan, though it was still invisible, still forming. But one thing was certain: she would not see it coming. The next morning, the house felt heavier than usual. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, but it didn't warm the tension lingering in every corner. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the grain of the wood with my fingers, replaying last night over and over. Her words were still sharp in my mind, echoing with every beat of my heart. It wasn't the first time she had put me down, but something about last night had pushed me past the edge. I closed my eyes and remembered the first time I had felt her disapproval, not just her dislike, but her deliberate dismissal. I was 10. I had brought home a school award for reading the most books that semester. My chest had swelled with pride as I showed her the certificate. "Books? Really? You think that matters?" she had said, tossing the certificate onto the counter. I remembered the sting, the way my hands had trembled as I picked it up again. You need to focus on real skills, not childish games. I had nodded silently, holding back tears, and learned early that her approval was a prize I would never earn. Dad had smiled at me, awkwardly patting my shoulder, but he never said anything. That was the beginning, her words carving small cracks in the trust I had placed in family. Years passed in a similar rhythm. I tried to share my dreams, art, writing, even joining the school band, but each time her reactions were sharp, cold, and dismissive. "You'll never make a living at that. Stop wasting time. Think about your future. Why can't you be more like your brother?" Each comment chipped away at something deeper. Not just confidence, not just happiness, but the sense that family could be a safe place. I remembered last summer sitting on the porch with my sister, laughing about nothing at all. It had been rare to feel normal around anyone, even in my own house. "I know. You're not like her," I whispered, nodding towards Stepmom, who was in the kitchen arranging flowers with her usual perfect composure. She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. She always makes me feel small," I said quietly. My sister didn't answer, but later that night she left the room without a word. It was the first time I realized that even those I loved most had started to take her side, or at least they stayed silent to avoid conflict. The years built a pattern I hadn't fully noticed until last night. Every insult, every sideways glance, every sigh when I tried to shine in my own way. They were pieces of a puzzle I had never wanted to complete, because seeing the picture meant seeing the truth about where I really stood in this family. I pulled out my journal, the one I had kept since I was 13, flipping through pages filled with sketches, half-finished stories, and secret hopes. I realized I had documented my own quiet rebellion for years. Every entry was a whisper of resistance, a promise that I would not let anyone define my worth. "Maybe someday," I read aloud from one page, voice soft, almost to myself. "I'll show them I'm more than what they think." The memory of my father's silence came back again. I loved him, but he had always been hesitant, caught somewhere between keeping peace and confronting truth. Maybe he didn't realize that silence could hurt just as much as harsh words. Or maybe, like me, he had learned that some battles weren't worth fighting. Until last night, when I finally chose to fight in my own way. I walked down the hallway toward the living room and paused, eyes drawn to a small stack of letters she had left carelessly on the table. One fell to the floor, landing face up. I picked it up without thinking. It was addressed to Dad. Her handwriting was neat, almost charming, but the words inside made my stomach twist. It read, "I just don't know how to make her respect me. She doesn't listen. She has no drive. You need to guide her better." My fingers trembled as I held it. It wasn't just criticism. It was a plan, a way she had spent years trying to shape me into something small, something manageable, something easy to dismiss. Suddenly, everything from my past made sense.
The constant disapproval, the pressure, the quiet undermining. It wasn't random. It was intentional. And I realized I hadn't been imagining it all. The betrayal wasn't a single word or moment. It was a lifetime of shaping, controlling, and denying my worth. I sat back on the couch, the letter clutched in my hand, heart pounding. The room felt smaller now, every familiar object tainted by the revelation of her intent. I felt both sadness and a flicker of something else. Clarity. This was my turning point. Not anger, not revenge yet, but understanding. Knowing why things had been the way they were allowed me to see my path forward. If life had tried to bend me, I could choose to straighten myself. If trust had been broken, I could rebuild it in my own way, on my own terms. I folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the stack. My eyes drifted toward the window. Outside, the sun was rising, painting the sky with streaks of gold and pink. A new day. A new chance. And in that moment, I made a silent promise. I would uncover every truth. I would reclaim what had been stolen from me, and I would do it in a way that mattered, a way she could never anticipate. The house was quiet, but I felt a storm building inside me. A storm not of anger, but of purpose. I didn't know how yet, but I knew this. The past was no longer just a memory. It was a map. And if I followed it carefully, it would lead me somewhere she could never control again. Something shifted in me that day. I understood, finally, that the betrayal had been deeper than I had realized. And in that understanding, the first seed of quiet justice was planted.
The morning after discovering the letter, the house felt different. I moved through it like someone learning the layout of a place I had known all my life, but had never truly seen. Every corner, every familiar chair seemed to hold a memory of her disapproval. And yet, I didn't feel small anymore. I made breakfast, carefully arranging plates for the family. Dad greeted me with a quiet smile, cautious, unsure if last night's tension had passed. My siblings mumbled their hellos, still tentative, and Stepmom, noticing my calm, raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. For the first time, I realized that power didn't have to be loud. It didn't need shouting or retaliation. I could act with thought, with patience, with a focus sharper than anger. I could reclaim my dignity without stepping into cruelty. That day, I began small. I cleaned my room meticulously, organizing my things, revisiting my journal, setting goals. Each action felt deliberate, a quiet rebellion against years of being dismissed. I spent the afternoons sketching, writing short stories, and completing little tasks I had put off. Each accomplishment, no matter how minor, reminded me that my worth was mine to define. Dad peeked in at one point. "You look different," he said softly. I smiled faintly. "Just trying to focus," I replied, careful not to sound defiant. It wasn't defiance I wanted. It was balance, calm strength, not chaos. Over the next few days, I acted with subtle intention. I listened more, spoke carefully, and stayed aware of the family's patterns. Every glance, every tone, every small interaction became data. I noticed how Stepmom's criticism often masked her fear of being challenged, how she flinched at unexpected competence, how she underestimated quiet consistency. One evening, I was in the living room, working on a school project, when she entered, carrying a tray of tea. Her eyes flicked to the project on the table, and I caught the briefest hint of surprise. "Working on that so late?" she asked, her voice casual, but with a touch of something else. I looked up calmly. "Yeah, I want to get it right," I said, smiling politely. She paused, placed the tray down, and left without another word. But the moment lingered.
I realized she had started noticing, and noticing meant awareness. Awareness could be unsettling for those who relied on underestimation. Later that night, I sat on my bed, sketchpad in hand, reflecting on the week. The calm I had cultivated was not weakness. It was armor. Pain had shaped it, yes, but it had also given me insight. I was learning to move with strategy, to let patience carry the weight that anger could not sustain. A few days passed, and subtle changes emerged. I saw my siblings sharing small, cautious smiles when I completed tasks efficiently. Dad began asking for my input on decisions he normally made alone. Even Stepmom, in her moments of private reflection, seemed unsettled. The quiet shift was unmistakable. One evening, I was in the living room working on a school project when she entered, carrying a tray of tea. Her eyes flicked to the project on the table, and I caught the briefest hint of surprise. "Working on that so late?" she asked, her voice casual, but with a touch of something else. I looked up calmly. "Yeah, I want to get it right," I said, smiling politely. She paused, placed the tray down, and left without another word. But the moment lingered. I realized she had started noticing, and noticing meant awareness. Awareness could be unsettling for those who relied on underestimation. Then, as if the universe was giving me a signal, I noticed a small change in her behavior. The next morning at breakfast, she lingered by the table, her eyes flicking toward me more than usual. Her tone was sharper than normal, and the words carried an edge I hadn't heard before. "You've been very busy lately," she said, a hint of scrutiny behind her attempt at casual conversation. I smiled, calm, collected. "I like to keep on top of things," I replied softly. No argument, no tension, just quiet assurance. Her expression tightened, and I realized she was beginning to sense it, that I was no longer passive, no longer the child who would silently absorb criticism. I could feel the first stirrings of unease in her carefully controlled world, and though she would never say it out loud, I knew it. This was the turning point, the moment when subtle strength met subtle fear, the moment when the quiet strategy began to take hold. I set my fork down and looked out the window. The sun was climbing, casting long streaks of gold across the kitchen floor. Everything had changed, even if the surface seemed the same. My patience, my purpose, and my quiet determination were already reshaping the dynamics of the family without a single harsh word spoken. And somewhere, in the back of her mind, she knew something was coming. She didn't yet understand what, but the ripple had begun. The first thread of reckoning was visible, and it was entirely mine to weave.
The living room was quiet when I walked in. Stepmom was there, arranging magazines on the coffee table, her movements precise, almost rehearsed. The afternoon light fell through the curtains, painting the room in soft gold. I stopped at the doorway, letting the silence stretch for a heartbeat. She looked up, eyebrows slightly raised. "You've been very focused lately," she said carefully. Her voice was calm, but I could feel the tension underneath. "I've been thinking," I replied simply. My tone was steady, calm, unshakable. I didn't rush, didn't demand. I let the words settle slowly in the space between us. She tilted her head, curiosity and caution mingling in her expression. Thinking about what? I walked to the sofa and sat down, keeping my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. "About us, about our family," I said, "and about the way things have always been." For a moment, she said nothing. The faint sound of the clock ticking filled the room. I could see her processing, weighing, sensing that this conversation wasn't going to be ordinary. "I found something," I said quietly, reaching for the photograph I had discovered, the one where she held the letter with that subtle, proud expression. I placed it on the table between us. "This shows more than you think it does." She looked at it, eyes narrowing slightly, lips pressed together. "I don't know what you mean." "You've spent years trying to shape me. Not through guidance, not through encouragement, but through control. Every comment, every suggestion, every dismissal. It was all part of a plan. And I've finally understood it." Her hands paused mid-motion, and I saw the first flicker of unease cross her face. I just wanted to help," she said quietly. "I thought I was guiding you." I nodded, listening. I didn't interrupt. "Help," I repeated, but it felt like limitation, like my worth was measured by how well I fit into your expectations. My words weren't angry, they were precise, calm, honest. She swallowed. I never realized you felt that way," she said, voice small. "I thought you appreciated what I tried to do. I didn't know." Her realization hung in the air, heavy and soft. I could see the pieces clicking together in her mind, the truth she had ignored or perhaps never noticed. I didn't press further. I let her come to it herself. "I see it now," she said finally. "I see that I underestimated you, that maybe I made mistakes." I nodded again, the calm in my chest steadying me. "Mistakes? Yes, but I'm not here to punish. I'm here to show that I've grown, that my life, my choices, my abilities, they're mine. I don't need permission, and I don't need approval, but I do want honesty between us." Her eyes softened, a subtle weight lifting. I never meant to hurt you," she admitted. "I just wanted you to succeed in my way. I understand, and I've decided that the past doesn't have to define us. I want to rebuild trust, step by step. But I also need space to be myself, and I need you to respect that." A quiet pause stretched between us. The tension remained, but it had shifted. It was no longer about blame or anger, it was about understanding, acknowledgement, and the beginning of repair. She looked at me, her gaze lingering. You've grown so much," she said, almost in awe. "I can see it now, and I realize how much I've missed by not noticing before." For the first time, I saw genuine regret in her eyes, not performative, not defensive. Realization. She had felt the weight of her actions without me needing to shout it, without me needing to dramatize it. Quiet power had accomplished more than anger ever could. I leaned back, letting the room absorb the change. "I've grown because I had to," I said softly, "and I will continue to grow, with or without acknowledgement. But I want us to move forward honestly." She nodded slowly. I think I can do that. I want to. I need time to learn how." And in that moment, something shifted completely. The room felt lighter, not because all the pain had vanished, but because acknowledgement had entered the space. The balance had begun. We sat together quietly, the photograph between us, sunlight stretching across the floor. No shouting, no accusations, only truth and the weight of realization. I had expected confrontation to be tense, maybe even painful, but instead it became something stronger, something that demanded reflection, acceptance, and the courage to change. As the afternoon passed, she began to speak in small, careful ways, asking questions about my projects, showing genuine interest in what I was doing. Not control, not judgment, just curiosity and attention. I realized then that quiet, thoughtful action had accomplished more than anger ever could. The betrayal had been exposed, the lesson had been delivered, and she, for the first time, truly understood the impact of her actions. I left the living room that day with a subtle shift in my chest. Confidence, mingled with compassion, strength, mingled with understanding. I had faced the betrayal not with fury, but with clarity, and it had worked. Outside, the sun was lower in the sky, the light softer, the air cooler. I felt the first real sense of balance in years.
Not revenge in the way most people think, but justice through understanding, growth, and truth. And deep down, I knew that while this conversation was only the beginning, it had set in motion something undeniable. A transformation was underway, and everyone in that house would feel it, whether they realized it yet or not.
The next morning, the house felt quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that isn't empty, but heavy with anticipation. I found Stepmom in the kitchen, sipping tea, her hands wrapped around the cup as though it gave her courage. I took a deep breath and joined her at the table. "I want to understand," I said softly. "Everything. Why it happened the way it did. Why you treated me like that." She looked up, eyes glistening with the first hint of vulnerability I had ever seen in her. She set the cup down carefully. "I wanted to tell you for a long time," she said, voice shaking slightly, "but I didn't know how." I leaned forward, silent, letting her words find their way. "The truth is," she began, "I was scared. Scared that you would fail. Scared that you would make mistakes that I wouldn't be able to fix. I thought, if I guided you strongly enough, you'd avoid the pain I've seen in others. I didn't realize I was hurting you instead." I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't the answer I had expected, yet it explained so much. The constant criticism, the pressure, the relentless insistence on control. It had all come from fear. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of life itself. "I thought I was helping," she continued. "I didn't see how my words were cutting you down instead of lifting you up. I was blind to the effect it had." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of that admission sink in. It was painful, yes, but it was honest. Finally, there was truth. Finally, a chance to rebuild. "I understand why you did it," I said quietly, "but it doesn't erase what it felt like. Every time you told me I was useless, every time you dismissed my efforts, I felt invisible, and that hurt for years." Her eyes filled with tears. I know it did, and I am so sorry." The air between us was thick with emotion, but calm. No yelling, no accusations, just the raw, quiet reality of human mistakes. And in that silence, I saw something shift, not only in her, but in myself. I thought about all the times I had replayed her words, all the moments I had doubted myself, all the tears shed in secret, and I realized that revenge, anger, retaliation would only continue the cycle. I could let the past define me, or I could choose differently. "You don't have to fix everything," I said softly. "I don't need punishment. I need honesty. I need the freedom to be myself." Her hand hovered above the table, uncertain. Then slowly, she reached out and touched mine. The gesture was small, almost fragile, but it carried weight. It said, without words, that she recognized the wrongs and wanted to make them right. "I want to do better," she whispered. "I want to be someone you can trust." And in that moment, I understood something important. Justice didn't have to be loud. It didn't have to hurt. It could be quiet, thoughtful, moral. I could rise above the pain, reclaim my life, and allow her to see the impact of her actions, not through cruelty, but through growth. I looked at her, the truth fully revealed, and I felt a strange calm in my chest. I could choose anger. I could choose resentment. I could punish with silence or with pride. But instead, I chose balance. I chose dignity. I chose life. "Then let's start over," I said steadily, step by step. Honestly, no more games, no more trying to control each other. She nodded, a small, tentative smile breaking through. "Step by step," she repeated. For a few minutes, we sat together quietly. The past was still there, lingering like shadows on the wall, but it no longer had the power to control us. We were both aware of the consequences. Mine, in the years of doubt and pain, and hers in the realization of how fear had shaped her actions. But awareness was a beginning. I felt a sense of relief, tempered by the gravity of the moment. Forgiveness wasn't instant. Trust wasn't rebuilt in a single conversation. But the choice, the moral choice, was mine. I had the power to let the past remain a burden, or to transform it into a lesson. I stood and walked toward the window, looking out at the yard bathed in morning light. The world outside seemed unchanged, yet I knew that inside me, everything had shifted. I had faced the truth, I had faced her, and now, the next step, the one that would truly define the story, remained to be taken. I turned back to her. "I want to see you really listen," I said gently, "and I want us to understand each other, not just exist in the same house." Her hand met my eyes, glistening. "I will listen," she promised. "I want to learn." The room was still. Soft sunlight, faint ticking of the clock, the quiet hum of life around us. And in that stillness, I realized that the choice was not over. The moral path stretched ahead, uncertain but full of possibility. Would I continue with measured patience, building trust and understanding? Or would I assert my independence more boldly, making sure the lessons of the past were never forgotten? The decision hung in the air like a delicate thread. Neither of us moved to sever it, both of us knowing that the next step would define everything. And in that quiet moment, I understood the truth of power. It was not in revenge, not in anger, but in the calm, thoughtful choices we made when faced with betrayal. The next chapter awaited. The path was still unwritten. The house was unusually calm that evening. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting warm amber light across the walls. I moved through the rooms, noticing details I had overlooked before. The soft creak of the floorboards, the faint scent of her cooking, the small imperfections that made the house feel alive. Stepmom was in the living room, sitting with a cup of tea, reading quietly. She looked up as I entered, a tentative smile on her face. No words of apology hung between us anymore. Those had been said, acknowledged, and felt. The tension had eased into something new. Awareness, respect, a quiet understanding that both of us carried. I held a small envelope in my hand. It was a letter I had written the night I left the dinner table, months ago. I hadn't shown it to anyone. It had been for me, a way to untangle my thoughts and solidify my own strength. Now, I felt ready to let it serve its final purpose. I sat beside her, hands resting lightly on my lap. "I want you to read this," I said softly, handing her the envelope. Her fingers trembled slightly as she took it, curiosity mingling with apprehension. "It's from you?" she asked. "Yes," I said, calm but firm. "It's everything I needed to say, everything I needed to understand about myself and about us. Read it whenever you want to understand what I've carried." She opened the envelope carefully. As she read, I could see her expression change, eyes widening, then softening, and finally filling with quiet realization. She did not speak. She did not need to. Every word in that letter was a bridge, spanning years of misunderstanding, fear, and distance. I watched her, and I understood something profound. Justice did not require anger or punishment. Justice could be quiet, reflective, moral. It could be found in truth, in acknowledgement, in the act of giving someone the space to understand their mistakes without malice. After a few moments, she looked up at me, her eyes glistening. I see it now," she said softly. "I see what I didn't understand before. And I see the strength you found in yourself. I am proud of you." The words were simple, but their impact was enormous. For the first time, I felt a sense of completion, not just for the past, but for the path forward. The hurt was acknowledged, the betrayal was understood, and now it had no power to dictate my life. I smiled faintly, feeling the weight of months of tension lift. "Thank you," I said. "I've learned a lot.
and I hope we can continue building something honest between us." We sat together for a while, the sunlight fading into a gentle twilight. Outside, the sky was painted in streaks of orange and lavender. It was the kind of quiet beauty that made you stop and breathe deeply, the kind of stillness that mirrors the resolution within. Then, in a symbolic gesture, I placed my own journal next to her cup. I said softly, "This is where it all began for me. It's a record of my growth, my thoughts, my reflections. Keep it if you want, or let it stay as a reminder that understanding takes time." She nodded, fingers brushing the cover gently. "I'll keep it," she whispered. "I want to learn from it." The moment felt like a poem without words, a gesture carrying more meaning than any conversation could. We didn't need to speak to understand the journey we had taken. The quiet acknowledgement, the soft presence beside each other, the respect born from honesty, it was enough. Later, I walked to my bedroom window, looking out at the yard where the first spring flowers were beginning to bloom. The air was crisp, and the faint sound of birdsong reached me. I thought about everything that had happened, the insults, the dismissals, the long years of quiet endurance, and realized that revenge had taken a different form than I had imagined. It wasn't anger. It wasn't triumphs over someone else. It was life itself. My accomplishments, my growth, my self-respect, they were the ultimate answers. They were proof that dignity and quiet persistence carry more power than cruelty ever could. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, I felt peace. Not just the relief of conflict resolved, but the deep, calm satisfaction of moral balance achieved. The story had reached its natural conclusion, but the lessons would stay forever. I turned back to the room where Stepmom was tidying the table. I gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding. She returned it, and in that simple gesture, years of tension and pain found their quiet resolution. The last light faded from the sky. The house was filled with calm, with acceptance, with a sense that life, honesty, and integrity had won over judgment, control, and fear. And in the quiet of that evening, I whispered to myself, almost as a promise, "This is only the beginning of living freely." The journey had ended, but the future stretched ahead, open and bright, carrying the quiet satisfaction of a truth finally understood, a balance finally restored, and a life finally claimed. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to heart, like, comment, share, and bell. Subscribe for more real-life love and emotional stories. Your support helps us bring more meaningful stories to life. Heart, greater than.